We're joined by Zolal. Sorry. Welcome back to the show. Today we're joined by Zolal Habibi, a human rights advocate and member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, a political coalition opposing the Iranian government and advocating for a democratic alternative. Her work is deeply personal. Her father, a political dissident, was executed during the 1988 mass killings of political prisoners in Iran. As a veteran community, we care about what democracy and accountability look like in practice, not just in theory. Zolal, we appreciate you being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And please allow me to greet those who are tuning into the podcast today.
So everybody here has been on our podcast multiple times, but I just want to let you know that everybody sitting here is a combat veteran. We're all from different branches. And so we are excited about this conversation. To start it off, I want to let you know of our dedication to Against the War in Iran, that Carl is going to pull up a photo of something that we did this week in this country. Carl wasn't ready for it. Yeah, you can tell. So I will preface it, Zolal. Veterans around the country came together on 4/20 on Monday of this week, and we protested in the rotunda of the Cannon building, of the Cannon House building. As a matter of fact, I got arrested. I got taken away in handcuffs from this. That's me in my hat. So I just want to let you know that this is a group of veterans that we are anti-Iran war. This is the dedication level that we're at. So I wanted to start it off with something personal, if you don't mind, about your father, because I know that that ties you to your activism. There's always a pinning point that gets people into the activism moment. So what do you remember most about your father?
Well, I actually have a lot of memories from my dad, even though I was only 7 when he was killed. Um, Fortunately, I have a graphic memory, so I have those memories. Unfortunately, my brother, who was only 3, has no memories of my father. But because my dad was a writer and he worked more like at home, so that's why I got to spend a lot of time with him. And I think that over time, I just a lot of my characteristics, it's something that I've gotten from him, and the way that he raised us. I think the most important lesson that I learned from my dad was the fact that stand by your beliefs no matter what the price, because that is what he taught us, not with his words, but his own actions. But also, I remember like how how much he cared about like you know human rights, human lives. How he hearing the news of what is happening in Iran, just shook him, and he would try to convey that to me or explain everything to me, in a language that a child would understand. But he would always put me at the crossroads of making a choice. He would be like, "This is what's happening. What do you think? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong?" And he made me make those choices, and then he would ask me like, "So why do you say that?" So for me to be able to defend my choices and to be able to make those choices have with knowledge, not just you know just going with whatever I'm told or whatever people are saying. But I also like remember like his kindness and the fact that he was always open to everyone. Our house was like a hotel. People were coming and going all the time, and people would just even at times stay with us for months until they were able to get off, get on their own feet. But the fact that he was always hospitable toward others and tried to have open arms to for others. That is something that has always stayed with me. Also, like his ambitions and his belief in like the day that, his inspiration in the fact that one day we will see a free Iran. And I remember like he used to always tell me like in 6 months, not in a year, in 6 months we're going to be in a free Iran. And he truly believed in that, and he was, working towards that. So that those are like some of the things that I remember vividly about my father, and it's also very interesting for me because it has been, I mean, it's almost 38 years now since he was killed. But what is interesting for me is that to this day, I get approached by people, like, for instance, in rallies and gatherings, like all over the world, not just in the US, but also in like Europe, and from people from across generations, some people who are even younger than me who were probably born after 1988. But they approach me and they're like, "Are you his daughter?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." They say, his books or his, viewpoints, they impacted our lives. Like, people come and tell me like this book, when I read it, that was like a turning point for me in, becoming active or doing this or that. And so it's very interesting to see how those messages live on and how they make an impact. And I think the most important lesson that I think he was able to set for others is the fact that he always used to say that, you know, um, being a writer, his job is not just to write, it's to act on what he writes, and that is what he did. I think with dedicating his life to this cause. So that is something that resonates with me. But as you said, there are different things that pull us or trigger us to follow these paths. And actually, I just wanted to point out to something because two of my dad's colleagues were unfortunately assassinated in um, in the years that followed, one in Geneva and one in Rome. And yesterday was actually the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Kazem Rajavi, who was a colleague of my father's. I have a lot of memories from him too, and he was unfortunately assassinated in Geneva on April 24th. This is about 1 year, a year or a year and a half after my father was killed. And he is considered like the, we call him the martyr of human rights because he was a professor in Geneva, but his brother, who was the leader of the Iranian resistance, was arrested as a student back in the time of the Shah. And so he started an international campaign to stop their execution, and he was successful in doing so. And he became, after the 1979 revolution, for a very short time, he was the uh, Iran's UN ambassador. But once, Khomeini took complete control over the situation, he resigned from that position, but he was really active on human rights in Iran in the 1980s. And he was, to this day, at the United Nations, they still remember him and his activism. And he was the first to bring these things to the international eye, really. Right now in Geneva, there's a street named in his remembrance where he was assassinated, but unfortunately, due to the policy of appeasement, those who were responsible for his assassination were actually allowed to return to Iran. And to this day, they have never faced justice due to the impunity that they had because they were they were diplomats who were taking part in this, terrorist assassination. So, because you said that, I just remembered Dr. Kazem Rajavi because he was one of those people who actually did have a major impact on me. And I was just telling someone today that the day I decided to join the Iranian resistance, that night I actually had a dream, and for the first time, I dreamt of my father. Like, this is what 11 years later. And in my dream, it was my dad was with Dr. Kazem. They were together in New York in Dag Hammarskjöld and they in Plaza right across from the UN building. And in my dream, they were talking to each other, and they're like, "Oh, is that?" Dr. Kazem asked my dad, "Is that Zolal?" And I said, "He said, yeah." she's grown up. And he's like, yeah, she's grown up, and I'm proud of what she has become. And so that was like, for me, that was like the minute I was like, I'm making the right decision. This is it. So um, just uh, um, just because what you said just reminded me of, that story.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. It's always powerful to find out why somebody gets into activism, right? Like, why does somebody step into that role? And I want to say in like your 2015 Persian language speech about the 1999 student uprising, that you got a full scholarship and went to Camp Ashraf, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, I would love to learn more.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. I grew up in DC area, and I had gotten a full scholarship, and I was planning on going to go and study um, medicine and ophthalmology. But that summer, when I graduated, it was summer of 1999. That summer, in July 1999, student uprisings broke out in Iran. And it was the first time after over a decade that there were major uprisings in Iran. And this time it was like the new generation. It was like the millennium that were coming to the streets. It was like people from our generation who were coming to the streets. And, um, you know, and it was also the first time that it was actually being broadcasted to the world, because it was the start of cable television and cable news, CNN and whatnot, and they were reporting on it. And I remember seeing the scenes of, people being thrown off buildings in Tehran University, or the students who were standing in the streets and chanting and protesting. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what are you doing here? Are you just going to be like a bystander and just watch from abroad like what happens, or are you actually going to do something about it? And I remember, like, it was a very difficult situation for me, I guess, because I felt propelled to do something. On the other hand, I didn't want to let anyone down, because I know there were like so much expectations of me, continuing my studies and everything. And when I came to those crossroads, I decided one night, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I have to go. I have to join the resistance. I can't be one of those people who like watches from abroad what is happening, and then once hopefully the regime ends, I'm gonna go with the airplane to Iran. That's just not me. I need to be a part of this. And I really felt like if I could do anything to safeguard one person's life on those streets, then that's my responsibility. And so I decided to join the Iranian resistance. And back then, yeah, I went to Ashraf, and Ashraf was a camp in Iraq. And it was the home of the National Liberation Army and the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. And so I decided to go there. You can imagine it was like a major shift back then to go. But I had been in Ashraf before because my mother was there, and my mom decided to join the movement after my father was executed. So I had spent 2.5 years as a child there, and those were like the best memories I ever had, even though it was at a difficult time because it was after my father's execution. But so I went there, and then after a few years, I came back to the U.S., and then I've been working with the National Council of Resistance of Iran ever since. And yeah, so either in the U.S. or in Europe, and based on the circumstances and what was needed, I've worked on different areas.
Yeah, thank you for that, Zolal. It's a really very powerful story you just told there. So I'd like to switch tack a little bit. I am personally just really interested in. There's a lot of propaganda right now with everything that is going on in the world. It is sometimes said that the first casualty of war is the truth, and we are now living through that reality. For our audience and for anybody else who might stumble upon us, I'm really curious what you think about outsiders and what they might misunderstand about the internal political situation in Iran. Who are the factions? Who are they aligned with? So that we can maybe help suss this out and help our audience figure out, who are the good guys here.
Well, you are completely correct. I think that right now, one of the things is like the different narratives that are being fed in regards to Iran. They differ a lot, but I think it's really important to understand like what is actually happening on the ground and what is the circumstances. If you look from the beginning of the year in January, we saw the nationwide uprisings in Iran, which is the fourth major uprising in the last decade in Iran. And we saw the direction. I mean, it started with the bazaar, the merchants coming their strike, but then on the second day, the students joined the universities across the country, and then every practically walk of life started joining this uprising, which was concentrated on the overthrow of the regime, and that they wanted the regime gone in its entirety. The regime did turn to brutal force on January 8th. They shut down the internet, and then they opened fire on the protesters. Unfortunately, a lot of eyewitness accounts that like people were telling us that we saw hundreds of bodies on the streets ourselves of people who were being shot and killed at point blank. The regime wanted to send a message because they knew that they are literally in a very weak position, and they needed something to spread enough fear in society to be able to control society. The same thing that we saw, they have been doing in different uprisings in Iran. 2019, they blocked the internet for 3 days. They had over 1,500 people killed, and that's how they were able to curb the situation. Unfortunately, there was COVID afterwards, so that bought the regime time to be able to regroup and just reassess everything. And then 2022, we had the next uprising. So if you remember, even during COVID, the Iranian regime was not bringing in vaccines into Iran because they didn't want it. They're like, oh, this is good. Everyone has to stay in quarantine in their homes, so no one's in the streets. And that was the situation. So unfortunately, thousands of people were killed in January. We do not have exact numbers because unfortunately, there was a 19-day internet blackout. And even after that, right now, it's been over 55 days now that people don't have internet access. So it's been very difficult to gather that information. We have the names of over 2,600 people who were killed in January in the protest. That has been gathered by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. The reality is that there are people who are saying very contradicting numbers in regards to the people who've been killed. I think the number is in the thousands, so that's high enough. But that you see some people saying 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 90,000. Those are probably not like realistic. But they do fit. I mean, they are part of the narrative to be able to justify war. So you have to take that into consideration, that why were these numbers being said? Because this is something that a lot of people were wondering even back then, and like, why these numbers, at such a extent. So that was the situation. And the reality is that unfortunately, right after the uprisings and the suppression, the regime, they've put in place like martial law in Iran, across Iran. And they try to suppress people to the extent that they can. The fact that the regime actually was broadcasting the scenes of the black body bags of all of those people who had been killed, or telling their families to come and identify their bodies. You can imagine like being a parent and have to go through these body bags one by one to try to identify your child. Seeing that many young people who have been shot and killed You can imagine what that does to people. And but it backfired for the regime. The regime thought this is how they can spread fear, but because the people of Iran have learned from previous experiences, this is exactly the same methods that were used in the 1980s for the executions, public executions. Back then, they used to, in the newspapers, they would print the names and pictures of people who had been executed and would say, would the families of these children come and identify their bodies because we don't even know their names and they've been executed. So people had that recollection. And so they understood that, look, this is what the regime is doing to spread fear. Their goal is to push us back into our homes. But the reality is that if we just look even in the last 10 years, every time there's a spark, people come to the streets and then there's brutal crackdown. And then the regime is able to buy time for 2 years or 3 years until the next wave of uprising. We can't let that happen again because each time it becomes more brutal too. So people knew that this time they can't go back into their homes. So people have been using every possibility or opportunity to stand in face of this regime. If you may have seen the memorial services held for those who were killed in these uprisings, the families were, celebrating the lives of their, loved ones, but also turning it into a place to show their defiance in face of the regime, making pledges to continue this path till the overthrow of the regime. One of the main slogans throughout Iran has been, we pledge to the blood of our comrades that we will continue till the end. And that's something that has resonated throughout Iran. So we were seeing this is about the memorial services that were held in Iran. It's like on the 40th day of someone's passing, they hold these memorial services. So that was in mid-February till about February 25th or so. So that was a few days before the start of the war. We were seeing these memorial services being held. Simultaneously, all universities have been shut down in Iran. And so on February 22nd, classes resumed on campus. Protests broke out immediately that day. So throughout Iran, on different campuses, there were protests. That started on February 22nd. That's 6 days before the start of the war. And on February 23rd, this was a very key moment. 250 members of the resistance units affiliated with the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, or MEK, they carried out a joint operation against the headquarters of Khamenei. And that is the first time in over 2 decades that something like this has been carried out in Iran. And this, you have to understand, this is the most secure location in all of Iran at a time that they were on heightened security because it was days before the start of the war. And the fact that these people were able to infiltrate that line of, security, even though there were over 8,000 security personnel protecting that area, that sent a message to people in Iran that the regime is in a much weaker state than we think. And secondly, people are like, oh, this is going to be the new norm now. This is the next step. The next step is going to be simultaneously having protests and carrying out operations against the centers of oppression. And that was the direction that we're going in. 5 days later, the war started. So when there's bombs over your head, you really can't do anything on the ground. And right now, due to the war, the regime has used that for, to be able to create complete, not only martial law, but they have like checkpoints right now, like throughout the country. Even right now that the ceasefire is still, the checkpoints are still there. All of the troops are in the streets to try to control the situation. There are a few different narratives that comes in regards to Iran right now. There is one narrative that they say the people of Iran want the war. That's not the case. That's not true. I don't think any people want to see their own people bombed or their country bombed. Because war does not come, war has casualties. War is not just, single targets or this or that. it has casualties, it has human casualties, it has, infrastructures that are being destroyed. So I don't think you will find anyone who would want their own country bombed. Were people happy that Khamenei was eliminated? Yes, people were happy that Khamenei is not alive anymore. But I think they saw it happening differently. They wanted to, hold him accountable for his crimes. But is the regime in a weak position right now? Yes, it is in a weak position. But this is, as the Iranian resistance has said for decades, for over 2 decades now, Mrs. Rajavi has reiterated that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's supporting the people of Iran and the organized resistance to bring about change. Why? Because positive appeasement is what leads to war. And war is never going to be the solution. You can't install democracy in a country, especially not Iran. Like, even when you look at it from a military perspective, since you guys are all, have been in the military, you can understand this a bit more than maybe others. Iran is like 3 times or 4 times the size of Iraq, with 4 times the population. If you look at it from a geographic perspective, even, we have desert, we have like the different terrains that we have just desert, we have mountains, we have jungle in the north, we have, the bodies of water, we have major metropolitan cities. In a country that's that big, first of all, just with bombings, there isn't going to be a regime change because it's not a classical dictatorship. It's not like, for instance, the Shah, when he left Iran 2 weeks later, the regime had collapsed completely. This regime has apparatus in place. So when you remove the supreme leader, they choose another supreme leader because the guardian council is still there. The system is still intact and it's able to run. The same way when Khomeini died, Khamenei replaced him. So it wasn't going to fall with just elimination of Khamenei. And we had said it, I remember a few days before the war, I did a few interviews and I was telling everyone it's not the same situation as Venezuela. Iran is not the same thing. Now people are seeing that. And secondly, this regime strives on crisis and war because it creates like this smoke screen for them to be able to suppress everything internally. The regime knows at the end of the day, with war, they're not going to be overthrown. So that's why, they are able to extend this, continue this for months at least to come. We saw that the war with Iraq, we have that experience in Iran. They could have ended the war after 2 years, but they continued it for 8. The other thing is that troops on the ground in Iran is not realistic. And the regime knows that. And the regime knows that, the US and everyone else knows that too. Because of the terrain, because of what we just explained, it would be a very dragged out war and it wouldn't be realistic, especially because you are dealing with the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism. The fact that the war has not been just limited to the borders of Iran, 12 other countries have been, targeted by the Iranian regime right now. And you also have to understand, right now the regime is playing both the victim card and the hero card for some. Because it doesn't have support inside of Iran, but it's garnering that support from outside of Iran by playing these cards, right? So that's what makes it a very sensitive issue in how you position yourself in this regard. So there are a lot of people saying, so what is the solution? I mean, you guys weren't able to overthrow this regime in 47 years, but the reality is that they don't take into consideration the positive appeasement and who has been used as a bargaining chip at the negotiation table with this regime in the last 47 years. At least in the last 40 years, it's been the Iranian people and the resistance. If you go back to the tower records from the Iran-Contra times till today, you see that it's a constant. It's always been, the bargaining chip set at the table by the Iranian regime has been the Iranian resistance. So that is something that you have to take into the equation to understand why this regime has not been overthrown yet by the people of Iran. The people of Iran have the capacity to do so and the capability to do so, but unfortunately, until now, their hands have been pretty much tied due to the policy of appeasement. So that is one side of it. Right now, the reality is that there are those who try to say, well, what comes next? Do we have to, right now, the regime has changed. There are new people. Should we start, just move on with this current regime, or what has to happen? You have to allow the people of Iran to take their plight, their destiny into their own hands. And that is what the National Council of Resistance of Iran is calling for. There are those who are, who want the continuation of the war. That is a very small faction, and that is mostly the monarchists. And what is the reason behind that? That is the only scenario that with that scenario, Reza Pahlavi could be a candidate of coming into power in Iran. Because the people of Iran overthrew the Shah. And monarchy in its entirety. The only way that he could return is if he is serving the interests of a foreign entity who wants to put him in that power position. Because he doesn't have any organizational structure, he doesn't have any concrete plan or a system. So that would be the only way that he could do that. On the other hand, we have the solution that is presented by the Iranian resistance. We say the solution is we don't have to choose between bad and worse. We don't have to choose between the current regime and the previous dictatorship. We can move forward to a secular democratic republic. And that is why the provisional government has been set forth by the National Council of Resistance of Iran for a 6-month interim government. And then there will be elections for a constituent assembly that will put together the new constitution. And then there will be elections to finalize the new constitution. And based on the laws of the new republic, elections would be held. So that's the gist of it.
So if I can pop in here real quick, Zolal, I never brought this up because I never thought to actually bring up in our previous conversations the difference between the NCRI and the efforts under Reza Pahlavi. Can you describe what the differences are between the two organizations? Like, how do they set themselves apart, and what are they doing in order to establish themselves as the dominant power that will slide into an Iran that is no longer favorable to the current regime?
That's a good question. Well, the NCRI came about in July 1981, and it served as a parliament in exile. In the NCRI, there are people from different backgrounds, both political backgrounds, ideologically, like their beliefs, religious backgrounds. All the different ethnicities of Iran are represented. The religious minorities are represented, and also like people who are atheists or whatnot. So it has a broad spectrum. It covers. There are over 500 members, 52% of which are women, as 25 different committees. They have very detailed plans that have been worked on for decades. With the NCRI, you never see the NCRI, trying to. We don't really run on advertising ourselves, to be honest. Like hyping things up or whatever. It is what you see, and I think that is the number one thing is that it has withstood the test of time. And that is what people of Iran feel like they can trust. Because when they say, for instance, that we believe in separation of religion and state, you see it in their support base, you see it in their plans, you see it in the, how they run things internally within the system of the National Council of Resistance of Iran itself. When they say, gender equality. You see that when they say, we need to have a independent judiciary. You see that the whole network or this whole organization or movement that has been created in regards to seeking justice has been part and parcel of this movement. The fact that even in face of, the policy of appeasement and being labeled, as a terrorist organization, they took the route of taking it to court because this is what they truly believe in, the justice system and, being able to have that. You see, they call for the autonomy of Iran's ethnicities. And you also see the relationships of, like, for instance, Kurds, Arabs, Turks with the NCRI. So every step of it, I mean, when you look at the 10-point plan set forth by Mrs. Rajavi, which is kind of like the cliff notes of the interim government plan, every step of it, you see how they are doing that in action. Like, for instance, it calls for non-nuclear Iran. Well, the National Council of Resistance of Iran is the first to reveal Iran's nuclear program to the world. No one would have known about Iran's nuclear program if we had not revealed it over 2 decades ago. So, and we have made over 200 revelations in this regard. So I think that it has shown that. On the other hand, the price that has been paid. 120,000 people have been executed for supporting this movement. And this still continues, despite, like, for instance, the PMOI or the Fadain Organization of Iran, who are members of the NCRI. Each one of them has over 60 years now that they've been fighting. So you see that continuation. You see people who have that kind of dedication for the freedom of the people of Iran.
Can I ask a structure question? Because we're structure people, right? We understand how our government is structured, in a democratic way. So can you tell us, like, how is NCRI structured? Like, who holds final authority, decision making, and how are y'all funded?
Well, the funding comes from the Iranian people and the Iranian diaspora. This is one of the key points that has allowed us to continue our activities for so long, is because we have kept our financial independence. And that has been very key throughout these decades. How it's structured, the NCRI has a president-elect for the interim government. So Mrs. Rajavi was chosen as that president-elect in 1993. Her time to serve as president is after the overthrow of the regime. So for people who have that question, like, why don't you change that? It's because it's chosen for the interim government, not for now. On the other hand, the 25 committees that the NCRI has, each of them serve as like a ministry kind of thing. Like, for instance, you have the education, the universities, the like economy, the bazaar, merchants, religious freedoms, arts, and the environment, like different 25 committees. And, like, for instance, instead of actually having a committee of defense, we actually have a committee of peace, because it was formed to try to end the Iran-Iraq war. And one of the main slogans of the NCRI since 1982 has been peace and freedom. So that is what we stand for. So these committees,
real quick, Zolal. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's just something I'm really curious about was that when we were talking about the structure stuff, you said 1993. So Rahav, I'm sorry, I'm going to say his name wrong. Rajavi, is that right?
I am Rajavi.
Has been in sort of the provisional government, leading the provisional government for 33 years. And there hasn't been any. Okay, sorry. And it has not been like, there hasn't been like reviews of this or anything. There's been like no process, no elections, no like anything like that, or.
Well, as I said, because she is not the president of the National Council of Resistance now. She is the president-elect for the interim government after the overthrow of the regime. So, like, her time.
So she does not have. She is. Yeah, so she does not have the authority essentially to decide what the National Council does. She is merely the interim leader, or is she actually the authority figure?
No, no. It has the Secretary General, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which right now is Ms. Mahnaz Salimian. This is something that is chosen by the full NCRI votes, and it changes like every few years. Right now, because of the regulations of the NCRI, that it needs to be a full session with everyone present, it has currently not been changed for a while, but it's with the decision of the National Council of Resistance and all of its members. So how voting in the NCRI works is every organization has one vote, not more. Like for instance, you can't say like because the MEK is much larger than like the Fadain organization, they have more of a vote. Each one of them has one vote, and each individual in the NCRI has their personal votes. Like so, everything is voted on by every individual too, but also when it comes to organizations, each one has one vote. So that is how.
You mentioned, I'm sorry, Saul. You mentioned each organization has one vote. Can you describe the member organizations of the NCRI?
Yes. The NCRI has 5 member organizations, and it is the People's Mujahideen Organization, is the Fadain Organization, and then we have the Merchants and Bazaars. They have, I don't know the exact English translations right now. That's my issue a bit right now. It's them, and then there's like the National Front, and there is one which is the it belongs to like religious minorities. It's a group. So these are the ones who are represented, and then we have people who are individuals who are not affiliated with any of the groups, and they each have that one vote too. So there's that. I hope that explains it. So the National Council of Resistance of Iran has put together their plan for the interim government. Right now, their main concentration is the work that they're doing in the international arena. So for each country, there is a office of representation. Like for instance, in the U.S., we have the National Council of Resistance of Iran's office in D.C., which is led by Ms. Sonat Samsami, and the vice chair there is Ali Reza Jafarizadeh. Or like for instance, in the UK, it's Ms. Dolat Norouzi. Or in each country has a representative, or like Mr. Khazai is a representative for Nordic countries or whatnot. So each country has their representative office, and they carry out the different activities. And then we also have, for like international entities, a representative like the Human Rights Council of the United Nations or whatnot. So those are also each have representation or a team that is working in that area.
Okay, and you mentioned that one of the member orgs is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which on the western side of the world we call that the MEK, because for English purposes, I guess. So what? And I did a little research into like the NCRI just a little bit, just because I wanted to give this conversation a little bit more flesh than our previous conversations, because this will be our 3rd round. But what I found was that the MEK had been listed by various Western countries as a terrorist organization, and they actually aligned or identified the NCRI as an organization that was aligned with the MEK as a terrorist organization. What is the validity between those accusations and the history behind those organizations? Because I've also read that the MEK is kind of like the lead organization of the NCRI.
Yeah. Well, the NCRI serves as like an umbrella group that all of these different organizations are members of. so some people get that wrong and they think like the NCRI is like the political wing of the MEK. That's wrong. The MEK is the largest organization, opposition organization in Iran, and it is a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. The MEK was placed on the terrorist list as part of the policy of appeasement. It was first placed on the terrorist list in 1997, October 1997, by the U.S. And actually, there is still the State Department's statement. It was printed actually in LA Times on October 7th, 1997. It says, as a goodwill gesture to the newly elected moderate president of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, the MEK has been placed on the terrorist list. In the US, with the MEK, the NCRI, NNA, all of them were placed on, and a whole bunch of organizations were placed on the terrorist list. A goodwill gesture to Khatami, who had come and they thought, he was talking about like discussion of civilizations and whatever. They really believed that maybe if they show goodwill gesture, Iran would be reformable and things would be able to change. Unfortunately, a political decision was made, but the price of it to be able to be delisted took a 15-year all-out campaign, judicial work, taking it to the courts. 5 different courts in the U.S. voted in favor of the MEK and forced the State Department to finally remove them from the terrorist list. So that was the story of it. After the U.S. made this move, the Iranian regime saw that it was effective. This is the first thing that they were putting on everyone's table. So in 2002, they also forced Europe to place the MEK on the terrorist list in exchange for an oil deal with Iran. And it was decided in the Fishery Committee to place them on the terrorist list. So, I mean, even when you look at the facts, it's just like bizarre, Like, what does the Fishery Committee have to do with deciding what organization is a terrorist group or not? Fortunately, in the U.S., in the EU, they were placed on the terrorist list in 2002, not the NCRI, just the MEK, and they were removed from the terrorist list after 5 courts. Sorry, in the US, it was after 7 courts. In Europe, it was after 5 courts. And which every single court verdict was in support of the MEK. They were removed in 2008 from the terrorist list. In the UK, right after the EU placed on the UK followed suit too, because it was a member of the European Union. And but it was removed from the terrorist list in 2007, when 32 members of the British Parliament filed a complaint against their government for making such a decision. So, and then in Australia and Canada, they were also removed because after due process and things. So in all of these countries that did place them on the terrorist list, it was as a goodwill gesture to the Iranian regime, or as I said, due to the policy of appeasement toward the regime. But the way that they were removed from the terrorist list was through the justice system of those countries. So, in fact, if you look at the verdicts in each country, they are historic verdicts because they're so strong in the fact that not one shred of evidence was found to link the MEK to any kind of terrorist activities.
So what would you say to the accusations of the MEK involvement in the killing of US soldiers? Because there have been those reports, and there have also been reporting out of like the RAND Corporation and the Human Rights Watch that have listed non-human rights positive actions that have been undertaken by the MEK. What is your response to those reports and those situations that have arisen that kind of draw question to the legitimate desire for a peaceful transfer of power and establishment of a democratic government in Iran?
That's a very good point. In regards to the 5 Americans that they say that were killed in the 1960s and 70s by the MEK, that is not true. It was a splinter group called PACAR that they, in 1966, they actually separated from the MEK and they turned, they said we're Marxist Leninists. And they not only they were the ones who carried out those operations, but they also killed members of the MEK too. So that is the reality of what happened back then, and this is something that the U.S. courts have looked into. But you know what? When propaganda is spread, no one goes and corrects those propaganda; it just continues to stay there. But the fact is that even in the courts, they looked at it. There's no reality. You know, that's not the reality. In regards to the other accusations that they make, which are in the RAND report or in Human Rights Watch report, in the RAND report, they say, like the MEK killed the Kurds. Well, that's not true. At the time, Hoshyar Zebari, who was the foreign minister in Iraq, in recent years, he has filed a statement with the international courts stating that that was a lie that was fabricated by the Iranian regime. The MEK never killed any Kurds. In fact, they've always had a good relationship with the Kurds. And right now, even you could see that even in the protests right now of the diaspora, you see right now there's unity between the MEK and the Kurds in different countries, and all of their protests, standing next to them side by side because they know there's no truth to that. The other thing is, like, for instance, the Human Rights Watch report. Also, unfortunately, at the time the Human Rights Watch report was being followed through by Ella Hicks. She is now known to everyone to be an agent of the Iranian regime, but that she was pushing that forward. A lot of those narratives and those lies, they came from Iran's intelligence ministry. Unfortunately, Iran's intelligence ministry is very complex, and this is unfortunately something that the international community has yet to learn. But the reality is that was completely debunked by both members of the U.S. because at that time, when that report came out, Ashraf, where the MEK were based in Iraq, was under the security and control of the U.S. military. So members of the U.S. military actually came and testified, I remember at that time, even in the U.S. Congress, in regards to this, that this report is complete lie and it's to serve the mullahs. On the other hand, a delegation from the European Parliament, a fact-finding mission, actually went to Ashraf at the time, interviewed all those cases, and they published a book about it, actually, debunking that report. So those actually exist. They're like, I remember General Phillips or others, General Cantwell, who all addressed this issue at that time at the U.S. Congress too, in 2005, 2006, and even in years to come afterwards, because there are a lot of, actually, what is very interesting is a lot of the people who, from the U.S. military who were stationed in Ashraf from 2003 till 2009, that they turned over the security of Ashraf to the Iraqis, which the U.S. broke its promise to those in Ashraf, because those in Ashraf, we used to have a National Liberation Army. It was armed in the border to be able to fight the regime. It was a classic military. They disarmed voluntarily to General Odeano. And the U.S. said, we will, protect you, and we will, this is not a, this is just a solidation of your weapons. It's not that we're taking it away, whatnot. But they went back on their promise. And so just imagine if there was a National Liberation Army still, the situation in Iran would be a lot different right now in the past 20 years. But that is the back.
My follow-on question here is, there's also been reporting that the MEK chose the Iraqi side of the Iraq-Iran war and supported the Iraqi side in that effort, even to the extent of providing security for Saddam Hussein. I mean, with that being said, there is indication that there is a level of distrust by the Iranian people who within the nation because of that perceived switching sides, so to speak, and support of a more aggressive neighboring country. How does that impact the efforts by the NCRI to establish themselves as the government in waiting, so to speak? And how does that play out with the Iranian people on the ground?
Well, so to explain that too, the Iran-Iraq war lasted for 8 years. The first 2 years, Iraq was on Iranian soil. The MEK fought against Iraq until Iraq stepped back to off of Iranian soil. In fact, unfortunately, at that time, there were members of the MEK who were shot from behind by the IRGC who were fighting on the front lines in the war. But when Iraq pulled out of Iranian soil, there was no need to continue this war. And the National Council of Resistance of Iran actually at that time presented a peace plan, which Iraq agreed to. Iraq signed that peace plan. The international community actually supported that peace plan. Over 5,000 lawmakers at that time supported this peace plan presented by Masoud Rajavi, who was the chair of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And but Khomeini refused. So everyone else agreed on this peace plan. And from that day on, in fact, it was the MEK who called on Iraq to stop bombing the cities of Iran. And to the request of the MEK, Iraq did stop some of the bombings against cities in Iran. Now fast forward 1980, I'm translating the years, sorry for the delay here. 1986, the NLA is formed in Iraq, the National Liberation Army. Why? Because Iraq figured, the enemy is my friend, but agreed to the fact that the National Liberation Army that is going to be formed here is going to be independent of Iraq. So it was treated as a sovereign area. It was treated like an embassy would be treated, and Iraqis weren't able to come in. There was an Iranian flag there. It was considered Iranian territory. And from there, the National Liberation Army was formed. The National Liberation Army carried out 3 attacks on the regime from March 1988 till July 1988. And that is what, after the second operation, which they went into till the city of Mehran in Iran, in Ilan province, that was a turning point in the 8-year war with Iraq. They did this independently. Their operations, when they went in, they would announce it, even though militarily it's not to their benefit, but they would announce it that we are not Iraqis, we are the National Liberation Army. So actually, most of the people who were members of the National Liberation Army are people who actually joined the National Liberation Army during those operations. So the people of Iran who were joining in. But at that point, Khomeini, who had said till that day that we will continue this war till the last house standing in Tehran, because with the war, Khomeini was able to suppress everything internally. But after Mehran, he said, I have drank the chalice of poison, and he signed the ceasefire. So, in fact, the reality is that what ended the Iran-Iraq war was the activities of the MEK and the National Liberation Army. And that is actually I think, something that we take very much pride in. The fact that we were able to end the Iran-Iraq war And with our independence, never was there any joint operations between Iraq and the National Liberation Army. Not a single operation or activity was joint. And they were even in different borders, because Iraq was going through the southern border of Iran. The MEK was going through the Kurdish area of Iran. So, that is there's a complete distinction there. And that is why, even with the downfall of Saddam Hussein and all of that, the MEK still stayed as a independent entity in Iraq. And that's why the US actually dealt with it directly too. And there was no affiliation there. So that is the issue. And in regards to the people of Iran, the reality is that I think that the reality on the ground speaks for itself. The fact that, just in the past month, if you look, unfortunately, there have been many protesters and political prisoners who have been executed. There have been, just today, another of the protesters was executed. There have been, I want to count exactly, but there have been 10 protesters that have been executed and 8 political prisoners. All 8 of those political prisoners have been affiliated with the MEK. And they are from different generations. Some in the 30s, some in the 50s, 60s. And I think that speaks for itself, because there are thousands of people who are in prison right now in Iran because of affiliation with the MEK. So I think that shows, the popular support inside of Iran, but also the fact that the resistance units have been so extensive in Iran. I mean, just last year
So I'd like to cut in, if you wouldn't mind. So I understand that America has a large role in the world, and the way that we exercise that role is not always what people want. So what do you want from America? Like, what would America do in this mission for a free Iran?
I think that one of the things that the US can do, and every government can do, there was actually a briefing at the US Senate just a few days ago, last week actually, that this issue was addressed actually. But to be able to clarify it, I think that one of the major things that the US can do is, first of all, recognize the people's rights to resist against this regime. And to be able to fight back against the IRGC and the suppressive forces. The second, I think, is very time to recognize the interim government for the overthrow of this regime, and recognize the people's rights to, their sovereignty, to be able to create a secular democratic republic in Iran. Because the people of Iran want to move forward to a secular democratic republic. And I think that is something that's very key. The other thing is to, shut down the networks of the Iranian regime. I know in the US, the regime does not have an embassy, but expel its agents and its operatives because they have many. And right now, the US has done so. Just like last week, the son of one of the officials of the regime was expelled, but there are numerous people like that need to be expelled. And I think also, one of the things that they can do is provide the necessary technical means to ensure the Iranian people access to the free internet, because internet and communication is key to be able to organize on the ground and to be able to do anything against the regime. We are not asking for financial support. We're not asking for troops on the ground. We're not asking for bombing. But, this is really important. And also in the negotiations right now, there's no mention of the people of Iran, of the, those who were arrested in the uprisings, the detainees of the uprisings, or the political prisoners, or these executions that are being carried out right now. So conditions, relations should be conditioned to end to these executions of political prisoners and the killing of protesters. I think that is a very legitimate demand to have at the negotiation table, and bring the regime's leaders to, hold them accountable for their crimes against humanity, for genocide, for war crimes that they're perpetrating, and because the regime reads between the lines. I mean, the fact that in the past 3 weeks there have been, what, 19 executions carried out, political executions carried out, and there has not been a word of condemnation from the international community. That sends a message to the regime that, okay, I can execute with open hands and no one's going to say anything right now. Already since the beginning of January till end of March, based on the numbers that we've been able to gather, over 650 people have been executed in Iran. Even simultaneous with the war, the regime is still carrying out executions on a daily basis, but there's no reaction from the international community. So I think that in itself sends a message to the regime.
So I'm gonna cut in for a second because you said something interesting about accountability, and so I'm gonna take us back in the conversation when we were talking about the soldiers' deaths, and you said it was by a separatist group. Can you rename that group?
KCAR. They're called the KCAR.
Because the reason I'm asking is through intelligence reporting, it was always linked to MEK. It was actually never linked to a separatist group. And I want to bring up a second point, is that you said that MEK was delisted in 2012, which is true, but they were not exonerated from any past violence. They were actually delisted because there was no terrorist activity within a certain amount of years, and they never met the criteria. What do you say to that?
But it's not the reality. And the fact that there is, multiple reports in this regard that you can take a look at. But the reality is that, there were no, first of all, terrorism is one of those things that they say it does not meet, based on international law, it does not pertain to the passing of time. So that is never an issue. But the reality is that a lot of those things that they try to say that the MEK did, give me one document, one shred of evidence for it. There's none. It's only just word of mouth and whatever that they're saying.
There is shreds. Hold on, though. There is shreds of evidence. There is shreds of evidence within our own intelligence gathering systems and other intelligence gathering systems from around the world, because that's the truth, and that's why you were actually listed.
No, it's not, because there are people who did have that clearance and they went and checked and they said there's not a single shred of evidence, because we had people, if you look at the mandamus briefs that were
You just said something very interesting. You said that you had somebody with a clearance check. Clarify that to a bunch of people that have intelligence backgrounds.
There are people who, because the State Department said we have documents that we can't share, then there are people who did have that clearance to be able to see those documents. They were part of the legal team. They took a look at it. There was nothing there. And this is something that I wasn't in the details, maybe completely directly, but I do know, and it's something that has been spoken about many, many times. And also there's a book that Ambassador Bloomfield has written in regards to responding to all of those allegations. I think that it would be a good thing to look at, because I think it gives you a clear, it's not a very extensive book, but it's a very complete breakdown of I think it's about 12 major issues that they try to connect to the MK, which we have no.
So it's really nice. I've been listening pretty carefully to what you've been saying, and I also saw one of your interviews with Mr. Abel before. So thank you for being here. But yeah, I mean, as I listen to you, while I acknowledge that terrorism as a concept is something that the U.S. has largely wielded as a blank check, I do have very big questions. I mean, for one, we know that after Western interference in the 50s created issues and ultimately led to the revolution, right? My question becomes, since that time, when things have, I would say, since the Shah was overthrown, gotten significantly worse for most people in Iran. And my question is, and I got to be honest with you, right? So my background is direct action in special operations, and so I also recognize when power structures are in a weakened state, and I think that due to what's happening, due to international outcry, as it were, and also the majority of the world really just majorly disagreeing with what the United States is doing, I see an opportunity, and I'm curious as we kind of move toward what your guys' plan is. I'm curious, how are we taking advantage of the strategic advantage that the people of Iran have now to actually implement some change? Who do you think has the power to implement that change, right, in terms of a group within Iran? Because I don't think it's something that happens externally. And so I'd kind of like to hear how you see this transition going, and how maybe the Iranian people and perhaps your organization and many others are taking advantage of the weakened regime. Over.
To answer your first question, yes, the reality is that unfortunately, we had a classical dictatorship before with the Shah and the Savak, and the crimes that were perpetrated by the Shah, which the crimes of the regime does not whitewash those crimes. But what came is worse because it's a theocracy. It's much more complex, and it's much more brutal. The reason behind it is, look, the people of Iran revolted because they didn't want the Shah anymore, but their revolution was hijacked. It was the Cold War era. During those times, about 6 months before the fall of the Shah, Western powers realized that the Shah was on the brink of falling apart, especially after the September 8th protests, which were the Shah's regime opened fire on the protesters, and 1,000 protesters were killed that day. So everyone knew that the regime is on the verge of falling apart. They brought Khomeini from Najaf, from Iraq, to Paris. They held negotiations with him. Why? Because they said, well, you know what? Who's going to come next? Those who are creating this revolution, who their leaders are in prison right now, are more, left lenient or, progressive movements. We don't know where they're going to stand in regards to the USSR and the US. But with Khomeini, he is opposed to the USSR because he is against communism, because they don't believe in God. So they thought their strongest ally will probably be Khomeini. And that is unfortunately the mistake that the West made and the Iranian people have been paying the price for 47 years. They installed Khomeini in. And that is the experience that we have with foreign intervention. It's not only the fact that the Pahlavis, both Reza Khan and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, were brought in by Western powers, or the coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh, who was the only democratic government that Iran ever had for 2 years only. But due to nationalizing Iran's oil, the US and the UK, they carried out a coup d'etat against him. And the people of Iran have paid that price. So if anything, to be honest, if we want to speak about ending impunity or justice, first of all, the US needs to respond to us for everything that they've done to our country, really, in this regard. But we are not looking for that right now, to be honest, because
well, no, I think you bring up something important for the listeners to understand.
Yeah. One second, because this is where, and then Khomeini was also brought in by the West. So that is why Iranians have this thing towards foreign intervention, because we have those experiences of foreign intervention, and that's why they're like, please, thank you, but no thank you.
Right. But the question is not about that. The question is about how we're utilizing momentum right now, because the bottom line is Khomeini fell out of favor with the United States, right? And they reacted not in a way that I agree with. However, the momentum, the strategic opportunity still exists for the Iranian people, and that's what I'm curious about. That's what I'm honing in on. I'm very aware of Operation Ajax and all the things that happened in the 50s. I'm familiar with Mr. Mossadegh's story. I'm familiar with what that put the Iranian people through and how it led to the series of events that have brought us here. But my question is, you mentioned pretty adequately what you said 47 years ago. That's a long time. And right now, there's this opportunity. Who is seizing it? And how are they going to transition power? That's the question. Over.
Well, for that, as I mentioned, so, for 12 years now, the MEK has been working on a strategy that they call resistance units. What they have done is they have created a network inside of Iran that is underground, that is working to, first of all, raise awareness in society, keep hope alive, but on the other hand, organizing these groups and these groups could be from 2 to 3 to up to 20 people. They're local. They are carrying out also operations against the regime. Like, for instance, if you look at the 8 people who've been executed in the past 2 weeks, they were all people who were members of resistance units. They were arrested. The regime has actually been showing videos of the fact that they were the ones who had carried out an operation against the MOIS headquarters in Tehran or in other cities too. So they are the ones who actually have this network that even during the January uprisings, they carried out 630 operations during the uprisings, which was in fact able to help push forward the protests as they were going forward. So we actually have these resistance units. Over 2,000 of them were arrested in the uprisings, at least, and before 3,000 had been arrested, but still, it's a very, very extensive network inside of Iran. And that is why the regime actually fears them, because they actually have that possibility to be able to do that. They have that agency on the ground because they're local and they know what they're doing, and they have been organized this way too. The other thing is that I can't give you more details about that network because of your own security and everything else. And this is something that the MEK command inside of the country runs. So the information stays inside of the country.
So I guess the question right now is, and this is where Mayhem was going with it, is that the United States, right, like the way that we did it or not, and we don't agree with the process, but it happened. Khamenei is dead. His son is somewhere, but really hasn't been seen. There's reporting that there is a power struggle between the IRGC and the regular military process and the regular military command structure. What is the NCRI doing in order to supplant those aspects of the regime in order to seize control? I mean, the conditions are set for an opposition movement to come in and start making moves, but we haven't really seen it. What we've seen is a lot of waiting and a lot of continued discussion with the current regime, which we keep trying to blow up at the same time that we're having conversations with them. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz keeps getting opened and closed, opened and closed, opened and closed. And you talk to us about how there is a movement that is ready to take control and take power, and yet we don't see any type of action on the ground by any Iranian opposition efforts to seize the moment and take power now because the time is right.
Yeah, I mean, and just to, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to throw this out there for the listeners. Okay, there's 91 million people in Iran. There's approximately, between the intelligence service and the military about 640,000 personnel with an additional 300,000 in reserve. Right, so you're talking roughly little over 1% of the population, right, has the, let's call it, oppressive power. Okay, and here's what I'd suggest. You brought up one of the that particular day in which so many protesters were slaughtered by the former regime, right? And especially with a median age of around 35 years old in Iran, right? So relatively capable young folks. I want to know how, if you are aware of massing of force, because again, I understand that it would be a risky operation, but it would stop the violence almost immediately if we could mobilize those people. So I'm curious to know where we are with that, because I'm a firm believer in, and this is why I disagree with U.S. policy so much. I'm a firm believer in revolution must come from within. The only successful revolutions in history come from the people, not from regime change, right? The American Revolution, the French Revolution, I mean, the existence of our very country, right, is a byproduct of revolution. So I'm just kind of curious, how you see, what groups you see being capable of that, and how you see that moving forward.
I think that, first of all, the situation on the ground right now, it's not as maybe like what you guys are saying right now, or that assessment isn't correct completely. Right now, the situation on the ground inside of the country is not in a way that a lot of these things can be done, because we are in a state of war. When, as I said, 5 days before the start of the war, you were seeing that momentum, and the fact that they were targeting the headquarters of Khamenei. This was then going to be a single incident. This was going to be something that was continuous. But when you have bombs over your head, and when the situation is in a way that right now there's complete martial law in states, no one can, like, right now they say if you want to go like a 30-minute distance, you're going to be stopped at least 2 times by checkpoints. And then those checkpoints, it's not only that they're checking your car or who's in the car, they're even checking your phones to see what is the latest app that you've used, if you have connection to the internet or not. And if you don't have a phone with you, they arrest you, because they're like, that just seems suspicious in itself. This is one of the things that, if you look at the files of the people who have been executed in the last week, 3 of the people in their case, it says this person didn't have a phone on them during the protest, which shows that this was planned not to have, that tracking on them or whatnot. So, I mean, this is the circumstances, but the circumstances that are currently in Iran, it's not something that, yes, the regime is in a weaker position, but right now is not that day that you can carry out these operations right now. So you have to, I think, we have to be realistic with, like, what is the situation on the ground to be able to see when this is going to happen. But this is the direction that it's going in, and this is what is going to be happening. You also see it, I think the fact that the regime, ever since the talks began with negotiations, they started these execution of the political prisoners, which is like from the day before the Persian New Year. They have started this. The message that it gives to the people, it's actually, I mean, you should see the reactions inside of Iranian society right now in regards to these executions, and how it is actually serving as inspiration for people to actually become more active. But the regime is trying to spread this fear, because they know exactly this is the one element that they fear the most, because they know this is what's going to bring its end. It's the combination of protest and operations by resistance units, and that combination is very important. And also, you also have to understand, like, Iran's ethnicities. Like, for instance, the Kurds, the Lords, a lot of Iran's ethnicities, they are armed. The Baluch. They need to have the proper circumstances to be able to come together.
But
and
wouldn't
to be
you
able
say that a state of war with the United States bombing the living daylights out of military targets throughout the nation of Iran would be setting the circumstances for those armed organizations like the Baluch and like the NCRI and the MEK, which has been planning for a takeover for decades now? Would you not say that that doesn't provide an ample opportunity for the next step to occur? I mean, protests prior to the war, the protests and the guerrilla style tactics were a great way to start moving that needle. However, now that this war has begun and now that there has been action on the current regime, would it not be prudent for the NCRI to take advantage of the regime's weakened state and leverage that weakened state in order to allow themselves to slide in and supplant the current regime?
it would be like when you look at it like a textbook version of it, yes. But the reality on the ground right now, it's not that circumstances right now. I mean, you have to the right now we are in a state like inside of Iran. The state is it's something in between. Yes, maybe there isn't bombing from the U.S., but the regime is still in a state of war. Like, and that's how prepared they are in the streets. I don't know if you've seen any footage from the streets of Iran. There is like you really can't go into any street without being like it's complete. I mean, it's a complete war zone situation. It does not allow the atmosphere or like the ability to be able to do that. There are things that are being done, but I'm not going to go into details about that, and I don't have the details about that because
Sure.
it's the headquarters inside of the country who are dealing with that. But what I do know is that in a state that people have right now with, I mean, the reality is, yes, they are in negotiations right now. So there's a ceasefire, but that ceasefire is not something that's very, strong. It could end any minute. That is not a situation that people can carry out these continuation of this fight in. At least for the time being, as you said, I agree that the regime is in a weakened place, and this will definitely help the people of Iran, but we need to just see how things go from here.
Is
Yes.
is the NCRI actively engaging with the administration right now?
We are with the lawmakers to the extent that I'm not very sure about like any other negotiate. I mean,
I asked because we've sent the vice president to Pakistan once. We were in the process of sending another delegation to Pakistan to interact with the Iranian leadership. And just today, President Trump said, "Nah, never mind, we canceled that." So the reason I asked that is like if we're continuously interacting and negotiating with the regime, what we're doing is we, as the United States, are providing credibility and legitimacy to the current regime, which is in its weakened state. And so the question I have is, are there efforts by the NCRI and I mean to your knowledge, by the organization that's being led by Pahlavi, are you guys and them engaging with the administration in order to gain a foothold on the ground and support by the current administration in order to supplant the current regime? I mean that's probably the best way that we can actually overcome the stalemate that we're dealing with right now in Iran is by getting a new group of people in there who are actually going to negotiate in good faith.
well, you know what? I don't have that information, and yeah, I don't have any details on that. And to be honest, just wanted thing to clarify about the Pahlavi. I don't know if you guys have seen Reza Pahlavi's visit to Europe in the past 2 weeks. He was in Sweden, Italy, and then in Germany yesterday or the day before that. It has, I guess, revealed his true colors. He has been I mean, if you look at the media right now in Europe, they are, they're revealing, his true nature and what they're seeing here from the press conferences that he had, the hopes that he had, which were, unrealistic, with his team was trying to present. The reality is that he doesn't have anything. He doesn't have an organizational structure. He has 4 people in his team, and that is it. And what does it rely on? It relies on, foreign interests who are propping him up. This was brought up in the press conference that he had in Germany because it was being held by an Israeli organization or lobby. And, that is the reality. And unfortunately, he has served as a dividing factor among the Iranian people, both inside of the country and outside of the country. And in fact, it's not helping. It is taking away from the momentum of the situation and the people's revolt. And so I think that this is something that's really important. And I think that the fact that these realities are coming out, it is a show in itself. But we also see a new, I guess, kind of, I don't want to say coalition, but we see like where people are aligning themselves. One of the things that we are seeing on the ground right now is, these 2 camps that are being created. It's everyone is coming together under this umbrella of, a secular democratic republic, and then there's the mullahs and the monarchists. So people are like, there's the slogan in Farsi, they say "Na shah na sheikh," which means no mullahs, no crown, or no turban, no crown. And so that is what we're seeing that's coming together. Like, for instance, you see that, the only organizations that have organizational structure in Iran right now is first the MEK and, their supporter base, and then it's the Kurds. But right now you see them coming together and organizing together and working together against the regime. And I think that's a positive step. You also see, like, for instance, the Baluch and others also joining in this, the Arabs. So the different ethnicities of Iran are coming together with the MEK and the left. So you see that coming together. And I think that's a very positive step forward. And you are seeing that united front, in a way, in face of any form of dictatorship. That's like their main slogan. Like, any form of dictatorship needs to go. We need to concentrate on people's sovereignty in Iran and how we're going to push that forward. But I think that in the weeks to come, we will see that coming together at a greater amount. And I think that we will see a clear direction. But the reality is that, as I mentioned, and our movement has mentioned, when there's a war, in the midst of a war, it's very difficult to organize things on the ground from the people when you are looking, especially with a country like Iran. You need to be able to take those circumstances into consideration and how you plan on pushing forward this fight. And that is something that maybe a lot of it we can't discuss in detail. Maybe a lot of I personally am not maybe the best source on, because that's not my department. But there are those who can better address this issue. But the reality is that right now we have to see how the circumstances change in the next few days.
Brian.
Yeah, so Zolal, I wanted to thank you coming on here and just helping us kind of suss through all these questions. We don't know a ton about this part of the world, or I don't, and so I'm learning a lot. At the same time, when I did my initial research, I kind of came across a bunch of stuff. And so there's one thing I want to talk about specifically, but there's a whole bunch of just really sort of things that are really making me, raise my eyebrows a little bit. So in 2020, there was an expose that was done by The Intercept. So if you are not familiar with American politics, The Intercept is a sort of a leftist publication that is oppositional to the administration, really oppositional to American foreign policy generally. Yeah, and it interviewed
by the Iranian regime and its lobby.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard about this, but just for the audience knows, and we can get the. And so there was essentially 6 defectors that went and alleged a bunch of stuff. So forced divorce, mandatory celibacy, forced sterilization, sexual coercion of female members by Mashoud Rahavi, forced separation from children, no outside communications, surveillance, disappearances, spying for Saddam's intelligence services against Iran. So there's a lot there. A bunch of defectors there. They've had other individuals that have, left the MEK and have leveled accusations against them. What I worry about when you talk about like uprising against this regime and how the conditions aren't right, wouldn't all of this out there in the zeitgeist sort of damage the movement's credibility? Because that's what it feels like to me. Because if I'm seeing it and everybody's seeing it, and you got the French government saying that's a problem, and the State Department, these are all groups that are oppositional to the Iranian regime and to each other, and they're all kind of arriving at a similar sort of conclusion as to the MEK and its sort of ideological disposition. So,
well, I think that the facts on the ground speak for themselves for the people of Iran. I think that a movement that has, as I said, withstood the test of time. Everything that it has said has been now proven in regards to policy, in regards to where they stand and their stances. And I think that is what we're seeing. In fact, the momentum that you see right now, one of the things that even the regime has admitted to is the fact that they say we don't know what to do with the growth of how amicable the MEK is for people, especially the younger generation of Iran, and how they're able to recruit so many people. This is one of the issues that it's one of their internal issues that is raised in the Iranian circles a lot, that how is it that they are the only organization that has the capability to attract the younger generation and to be able to make them active. So, I mean, I think that a lot of Iranians also know that the regime is one of the #1 states when it comes to propaganda. And they know how this has worked because, they've been dealing with this for decades. I have met people that when they meet us, they're like, oh, you guys are the hypocrites, because that's what the regime uses. And we're like, no, it's not the hypocrites, it's the MEK. And they're like, yeah, same thing. They're like, the regime hates you, so you guys must be good. That is the narrative Iranians have, Iranian people. So I don't really think that is the issue. And especially if you look at today, there's an article in The Guardian. I would, I think it's great if people take a look at it. It's in regards to the people who were executed the past few weeks in Iran. And one of the things is that, especially on a few of them, there are a lot of videos, letters surfacing from them that they had done even before they were executed. And they are coming out now. And it has created this whole momentum in Iran society, and it's drawing people to the MEK. They're like, if you look at all of the people who are in prison right now because of affiliation with the MEK or been executed, you see they're all really the cream of the crop of Iran society. Why is it that every elite student who's in prison right now is because of their affiliation with the MEK? They are literally the cream of the crop of Iran society. When people hear what they have to say, when people hear their testimonials, when people are hearing this, they're like, if that is the MEK, then we support that. And that is, in fact, what has opened this path. I think that each one of us, we serve as the best agents to be able to present to the world, to the people of Iran, who the MEK really is. And then the reality is that everyone knows that. A organization that has been able to stand independently despite being the #1 target of propaganda for decades, that speaks for itself. The fact that look at, unfortunately, this is very unfortunate for us, but unfortunately, look at Iran's political spectrum. Who has been able to keep its there were leftist groups that had strong organizations, organizational structure, back in the early 80s or late 70s. Where are they today? They're non-existent. Why? Because Iranian regime is very brutal. The methods that it uses is very complex. No one has been able to withstand that accept this movement. So it's doing something right. And I think that is the message that people of Iran are getting. And that's why we see the growth of the resistance units. Practically, if you look every year, their operations are going up, like multiplying. Just in 2024, like for instance, they carried out like 40,000 activities throughout Iran, and that's on daily basis. Just to calculate how much that is. Those are the people who are risking their lives to go and carry out these operations. It has a whole bunch of other supporters who don't take those risks. And I think that speaks volume. And the fact that, like, for instance, if they were so unpopular, or if, how are they still running, being considering that they are independent? How is it that, over 4,000 lawmakers around the world are supporting this movement? I mean, some of, the prominent personalities from across the spectrum, from far left to far right, support this movement. We don't necessarily support their views. They are supporting this movement. And I think that speaks for itself. And I think that is because anyone who has experienced the MEK directly themselves, then they're rest assured that these things are truly propaganda and there's no truth to it. And a lot of it is,
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question about? I'm gonna ask a question. If a free election was held tomorrow in Iran, let's say like tomorrow, what percentage of the vote realistically do you have within Iran? I'm talking about MEK specifically, because there's many faction groups in any war zone, and we're aware of this being soldiers. Like, you have many factions. So what percentage of the vote?
I don't think anyone can make that assessment. I can't say that, and I don't think anyone.
Do you think it's more than 50%? Do you think that MEK would win the popular vote in a democratic election within Iran?
You know what? I think that's for the people of Iran to decide. I can't make that judgment because the people of Iran have not had the chance to be able to take.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because you're saying that you have like all of the support MEK does, and they're doing all of these attacks, and there's like so much support within. But then now, when asked how much democratic support within an election, it's we don't really know. We'd have to let them see. So like it's kind of a half and half of either you do have the support within an election or you don't. And so what do you think that is?
Thing. And I don't think, look, because I'm trying to be realistic, I could tell you like, well, based on these facts, we do have a lot of support. I'm not going to do that because it would be irresponsible, I think, because it would be just feeding into propaganda in itself in a different way.
Okay,
but look,
I'll let you answer. I'll let you stop there, but I'm going to ask another question. Let's say that MEK wins tomorrow. You get like 60% of the popular vote. It's a landslide, right? Rajavi takes power because that's the provisional government. But Rajavi has been waiting since 1993. And so therefore, that's not really like, I mean, to me, it just doesn't make sense. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and I'm going to say it from an American perspective. Everybody sitting here is tired of leaders sitting in power for decades and decades, right? Like from an American perspective, we have senators and Congress that have been in there for 40 years. They're not representative of the young people. They're not representative of like what we all want. And so my worry is that with Rajavi sitting there since 1993, waiting to hold power, that is a generation or two removed from what is actually going in with Iran, like within Iran, and she doesn't live there. She lives like outside. And so therefore, that's my question is how do you make sure that when there is no disconnect within the movement, if you're elected, right, is we're talking about somebody that's sat there for decades. So I'm wondering about that. Because we have that problem here. We have that problem in America.
There's a difference between a political party and a organization and a resistance organization. With a resistance that wants to concentrate on the overthrow of a regime, you need to have that that solid network and everything that it's working on. If you're changing, I mean, we do, like, for instance, the MEK itself, the Secretary General of the MEK has changed every few years since, if you look from 1989 till today, there have been plenty of different, Secretary Generals that it's done through election. Every single person votes in the MEK. It's not even, just a popular vote. If there's anyone who is opposed to it, they would raise that issue and it's considered. So we have those elections and we do have those changes. First of all, Mrs. Rajavi is the president for the interim government until there's elections. I don't think she probably might not even become a candidate for the election when there's a free election. So, that's not a given to us because our dedication has been for the overthrow of the regime.
So,
and
follow-up
to hand
question.
over sovereignty to the people of Iran. That is our aim. We are not a political party. We are a resistance organization. There's a difference
So I get that. So within the first 100 days, can you lay out your plan? Like, what is your policy plan when the regime falls? You win democratically. Within 100 days, what are you doing? Are you having elections? What are you doing?
As I said, there's a 6-month interim plan, which has been outlined by the NCRI from October 1981 till now, and it's been worked on since then. On the first day of the war, Mr. Rajavi actually announced that with the day that the provisional government can be formed anywhere on Iranian soil, within 6 months there will be free elections. That statement is available from February 28th. If you look on her website, it's still there. 6 months after the fall of this regime, 6 months after the interim government enters Iranian soil, even it might not be after the fall of the regime, maybe the regime falls a bit later. But 6 months after the interim government enters Iranian soil, there will be elections for the Constituent Assembly. And the new constitution will be, that Constituent Assembly will be responsible for the new constitution, and they would be the provisional government after that 6-month point. So they will be dealing with both issues. And then when the constitution, the new constitution is written, is drafted, it is put to vote. It will be put to the vote of the people of Iran. And once they vote on that final constitution, then there will be elections under the mandate of the United Nations and international entities to make sure that there's complete transfer of power to the people of Iran. So that day who is going to be the candidate, I don't know.
And this is, I guess, I think this might be the last question of the panel.
Because that is very clear.
Right. But here's what I want to lay it out before I ask the question. First and foremost, we're asking the hard questions because we as veterans with an understanding of history understand that America frequently sticks its nose in places and creates quagmires of situations. And we also recognize that in nations that are dealing with a failing dictatorship, the transfer from a dictatorship to a democracy is frequently hard and can sometimes lead to a new dictatorship. So when we ask the questions about the MEK, when we ask the tough questions about the history and the allegations, we're asking them because we as veterans don't want to see another dictatorial regime hop into Iran. Like me personally, you and I have talked. I want to go to Iran one day as a tourist. I would love it because Iran has so much history that it's something I want to do. But I won't be able to do that if Iran turns into another dictatorship that just got replaced. So my question here is, when that happens, when Iran, the current regime falls, and when those elections occur, and the MEK does not get the support from the people, will the MEK and the NCRI accept the results of that election and allow for the people to self-govern and self-direct themselves?
Yeah, that is something that I can promise that the MEK will do. And this is something that MEK has actually stated, not today, but for decades, actually. Actually, I remember back in 2009 when the uprisings happened back then, The issue at that time was, there were some who were like, what if actually Musavi does become like the head of the regime or something like that, or there's some kind of like a moderation within the regime or something of that nature, or what if this regime is overthrown and something else, not what the way we thought that this regime will be overthrown. And from then, the MEK has made clear, and this is a statement that every Iranian knows, I think. The MEK has said, look, all we want is to have our rights, like the basic rights, to be able to have our headquarters, be able to, have our activities, not be suppressed, not be executed, and that's it. It's fine if we're not in the government. And I think that MEK have actually, they have proven that in the past, because back in after the 1979 revolution, the reality was that Khomeini was brought in, but people had, the support that the MEK and the Fadain organization had in Iran was immense, because everyone saw them as the true people who had actually created this revolution. But Khomeini said, Khomeini offered some of the highest positions to the MEK, and the MEK refused. They said, no. We are not, we don't believe in having a supreme leader or having this theocracy, and we're not going to undermine our principles. And they took part in the parliamentary, like they had the presidential candidate, which was the #1 presidential candidate, but they resigned from the presidential election because they're like, no, we're not going to agree to the notion of supreme leader. So they've stepped back. They were part of the parliamentary elections because at that time, Khomeini was not able to, he didn't have complete grip over power at that time. In that, parliamentary election, the MEK had the most votes practically in most of the cities. Like, for instance, Mrs. Rajavi that we just mentioned, she was, I think, the second candidate in all of Tehran. At that time, a woman to become the second candidate, that was, something for itself. But Khomeini said, no, the MEK can't be a part of it. And they're like, okay, we're not going to be a part of it. They stepped back because for them, they were never after power. They were after guaranteeing people's rights and liberties. And that is what's key for us. We don't want any part in power. We just want to be able to guarantee this, transfer of power to the people of Iran. And that is what we stand for. And the guarantee, or I think what helps to make sure that we don't derail off this road is what you see in the 10-point plan, and the plan of the interim government and all of the plans that they have in place for the interim government, which have been written out, and it's available to those who want to read about them.
Oh, and Katie is coming back. I was about to close it out, but since she's jumping back in, Katie, do you want to go ahead and close this out?
Yeah, Ms. Habibi, I do want to say I appreciate you being here and you taking some very hard, rapid fire questions from us. We come from the military and we're not always the nicest or the most, the kindest. But we do try to get to the bottom of stuff, especially things that we research and we question, and then, we do more research and then we want to ask hard questions to get to the bottom of it, because we want to see a free Iran. It's like Carl said, I'd love to go to Iran. I'm a history person. I want to go see where the oldest history in the world is. And it's in Iran, and in Iraq, it got destroyed. And so Iran is like the last bastion of old history. And so we do hope that there is a free, democratic Iran, because I'm sure if we ever showed up, you'd give us a tour and be like, hey, we'd love to have you here, right? Because we'd love to go. And I hope one day that happens, whether it's with your group or with another group. We want to see a safer world, a world where unfortunately, America is not sticking their nose where it doesn't belong and starting wars that we don't believe in. We've been in generation after generation after generation of war as Americans in the Middle East within the last, since 2001, we have been meddling, and before, within the Middle East. We think it's time that Iran owns its own destiny. Whoever does it, whoever overthrows it and owns that, we support. We just want it to be free, fair, and free of any criticism that is going to make it seem like it is authoritarian, like a cult, because we read that. We read all of those accusations, and we hope whoever does free Iran and gets elected, that they run it well so that this group sitting here and more veterans that's within our group can come visit Iran. We would love to do that within our lifetime. And we wish you the best. And we hope to see a free Iran within our lifetime and within yours. I know you've been fighting since your father was killed. I would love that for you, right? As an activist that has been in the military space for over a decade, woman to woman. I want to see your dreams live out for a free Iran so that you live up to your dad's expectations. He wanted a free Iran and you're carrying out his work. So let's make sure that it happens within your lifetime so that you feel fulfilled, that you did your father's work and everybody's free and we have a democratic Iran and veterans get to come hang out with you and eat really cool food. And I am a history buff. Like I said, I am going to see all of the sites. Working within Iran that is trying to free Iran. And we hope that you stay safe. You have our support as veterans. We want to see a free Iran. And Brian, I saw you saying something. I saw you come off mute, Brian. Did you want to say something?
No, thank you for coming on, Zolal. I just saw you. I thought you were DC, and so I was going to get ready to take over, but we're good.
All right. Well, I hope to see everybody next time. On Wednesday, we are going to be talking about the biggest epidemic in the military that nobody talks about, and it's MST, military sexual trauma, which is a weird acronym for rape. But Miss Habibi, thanks again. I will let you close us out, and please stay safe.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope I was able to answer part of the questions. I don't think we had enough time to answer some of the questions, but the reality is that, as you said, for us also, I mean, as someone who has dedicated, the last 26 years of my life to the fight for Iran, the reality is for us, the number one thing is to be able to turn that, transfer sovereignty to the people of Iran. That is our number one issue, because if I was in it for any other reason, there were other ways to be able to pursue whatever that was that I wanted to, gain in life. But that is the reality, and I think that speaks for itself. But I would also like to use this opportunity to say something. There is going to be actually a rally in DC on May 16th, I believe, from being organized by the Organization of Iranian American Communities. For those who want to show their solidarity and support, please reach out to OYAC, and I think they would be more than happy to have you with them. But also, it's a good opportunity to be able to speak directly to the Iranian community there and to be able to better understand what is happening and what is it that the people of Iran yearn and are fighting for.
Absolutely. Thank you for telling us that. I don't think any of us were tracking that date, so now we are.
It'll be in Upper Senate Park. It's on May 16th, and it starts at about 11 a.m.
All of us are all over the country. I live in Florida, but I will be sending it to our DC contacts to kind of show up and support. So thank you for letting us know of the action. And once again, I want to thank everybody on the panel again for coming tonight. And Ms. Habibi, I hope you stay safe. And once again, we do hope for a free Iran.